Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of RPGs with Paddy. I'm Paddy. And before I begin, I would really like if you could like this video if you enjoy it, and also consider subscribing to my channel. Today we're going to be continuing my series on Cthulhu by Gaslight by looking at the scenario Night of the Jackals. This is the first of two scenarios included in the 3rd edition Cthulhu by Gaslight. It was written by Kevin Ross, who wrote most of the new material for the Cthulhu by Gaslight 3rd edition in general. There is no suggestion for the number of investigators, and although it says the mystery is enough to confound even veteran players, the scenario is described as an introduction to Victorian-era role-playing. So you can have it with new or old players. Great. And that is about as much as I can tell you without spoiling it. So if you're a player who hasn't played this, please stop watching here, or you'll ruin the fun mystery for yourself. If you're a keeper, or you're just interested in checking out the adventure, let's check it out together. So, when you hear about this scenario, you'll probably think about the curse of Tutankhamun, when the explorers went over and opened up the tomb of Tutankhamun. Everyone who opened it up was cursed, and well, so the saying goes. Although you can't actually really use that in your adventure, well, you can use ideas from it, but don't mention it to the players because that curse happened in 1922. And we're now playing in Gaslight in 1890s. So you can use that certainly as background for yourself and as inspiration, but you can't use it as an in-world event. So the story is mostly set in London. The story is that during a military operation in Egypt and Sudan, right on the border, Colonel Hollingsworth learned about a secretive cult who used terrible magic, and maybe they were doing human sacrifice as well. He gathered his uninjured men, so he had the whole battalion, but he could only take the uninjured ones. And they attacked the cult and killed all of the cult members without losing a single of their men. Without losing a single of the army's men. They found a lot of gold and artifacts and also ancient scrolls and a simple mummy in a case. Hollingsworth kept the scrolls and the mummy, and he arranged to sell the rest of the items on the black market and split the money amongst his men, with him not taking any. But of course he kept the scrolls and the mummy. When he returned to London, he got in contact with an old friend and Egyptologist, Geoffrey Jordan, to look at the scrolls and see, what are they saying. Jordan came back, having translated them, saying that the mummy was that of a high priest, whose rebirth would only occur when infidels had invaded the mummy's country and taken his remains to a distant land. This resurrection would destroy the country of the infidel, so in this case England. The scrolls also have written in them the ritual for resurrection. Hollingsworth disagreed with all this nonsense, and the two rowed, which actually ended their friendship. Several years later, it seems that the curse is coming true. A soldier who was part of the attack on the cult died falling in front of a train, and another was strangled at his cottage in Dover. Hollingsworth has also been visited by Munir Faiz, a learned Egyptian who warns of the dangers. Actually, Faiz is a cultist and has two fellow cultists with him in London. The two fellow cultists pushed the first man in front of the train, and a summoned jackal-headed creature strangled the other. Faiz also has some zombies under his control. And so their goal is they want to get the mummy and the scrolls back, or just get the scrolls and try to resurrect the mummy in Hollingsworth's office. So that is basically the setup. Now let's look at the different characters that you will meet. I made this layout, which I'll be showing now, Kind of inspired by the character layout in Cthulhu Confidential games. Hopefully it's of some use to you. Just a quick reference. There's a link in the description below where you can download it for free. So we have kind of three major sections of people. We have the main army guys, so we'll go through them. Of course, we have Hollingsworth, Colonel Hollingsworth. He is in possession of the mummy and the scrolls. And other points of interest, he hasn't been to the club recently. He also has a wife, Ramona, and a son, Michael, who is 3. There's also Alan Pace, who is one of the investigators' uncle. That's how the investigators get tied into this. He was injured prior to the raid, so he didn't take part in the raid. There's also Orland Reynolds, who is dead. He fell in front of a train last week. Fell. There is Sergeant Major Herbert Crouch, who was strangled in his garden. Again, he is deceased. There is Toby Norton, who is very poor now. He must have lost all the money he got in the raid. And he works at the Army and Navy Club. He doesn't want to divulge information, but he can be persuaded with money or if he thinks it will save lives. There is Major John Gower, who was the second in command in the raid, and he will not share any information about the mission whatsoever. There is also Elliot Sangster, who, after coming back, he became a doctor. He didn't participate in the cult raid, but he did hear about a secret mission. So that's a link for the players. So next we move on to the next section of people, which are kind of non-army but friendlies. So we have Jeffrey Jordan, who was the ex-friend, or is the ex-friend, of Hollingsworth, Colonel Hollingsworth. He translated the scrolls, and he currently has a copy in Egyptian hieroglyphics and also translated to English in his possession. We get Inspector Harrison Craddock of Scotland Yard. So he is the main police investigator for this. At the start, he's not really involved, but as the deaths start piling up, he will see that there is some kind of connection. There is Fordyce. He is Hollingsworth's butler, and he is fiercely loyal. So yeah, he will not believe any bad things said about his master. There is Ramona Hollingsworth, who is Colonel Hollingsworth's wife. So she is very worried about her husband, and maybe the visit he recently had from Fayez, and maybe about the fight he had with Jeffrey Jordan, but that was quite a long while ago. We'll get to that later. After that, we have the bad guys. So we have Munir Fayez, who is the senior cultist in the operation. He actually may approach the party and pretend to be a benevolent helper, and he might try to implicate Hollingsworth in the murders. Then we have the two kind of lower cultists. We have Awad Salama and Youssef Biket. So they are just cultists, and they'll go around maybe killing people. Sometimes they'll wear jackal head masks, helmets, I guess, to go around and try to scare people. In particular, they're trying to scare Hollingsworth to make him believe that the curse is coming back and he has to give up the mummy. And finally, for the bad guys, we have the Child of the Sphinx. So this is a 7-foot tall, jackal-headed humanoid, and he has a protective amulet about him. So yeah, finally, one last thing. The cultists worship mythos gods posing as Egyptian gods. So they worship Thoth and Athen and Anubis, who are really Nyarlathotep or Yog-Sothoth. It says both, it could be. Azathoth and Nyarlathotep again. But that's not so important. Almost never comes up in the entire thing. So we actually get a nice map of important locations around London, but it's only really useful for the keeper to keep track of it, as it has lots of labels on it. So the investigation starts when one of your investigators was planning on having dinner with his uncle, Alan Pace, but Alan has to cancel. he has to go to his friend's funeral in Dover. He mentions, and so telephone wasn't so widespread here, so I'll probably call by and mention that it's the second member of his battalion to die recently. And he says that Orland Reynolds fell in front of a train, and now Herbert Crouch was strangled in his garden. If the investigators want to go to the funeral, that's fine, but as the text says, there is little to learn in Dover. The best thing that you can do is you can meet Toby Norton, who is one of the members of the raid. They can also hear, the investigators can also hear that Hollingsworth hasn't been coming to the Army and Navy Club in London lately. There's nothing much about the murder, but if you talk to enough people, a neighbour reported seeing a very tall figure near the back of the garden on the night of the murder. And this is a link to the Child of the Sphinx. But they couldn't make out any features. So upon returning to London, we can learn a little bit more about the regiment. Maybe the investigators go to Somerset House, or they talk to their uncle. But however they want to research the regiment, if they want. But the investigators should not learn about the cult raid yet, as it was secret. And Alan wasn't involved in it. He doesn't know about it. The investigators should eventually make it to the Army and Navy Club, maybe wanting to talk to some of the Army members. If I was doing it, again, I would get the investigators, I would get the uncle, Alan Pace, to invite them to the Army and Navy Club to kind of make up for missing the last dinner. If you're too focused on the reality there that non-members wouldn't be allowed into the club, you could say, drop by, meet me at the club, and then we'll go out to dinner somewhere else. And that gives them a chance to kind of talk to some people. So at the club, they can meet Toby Norton again, who is working there. So you might have met him before in Dover, or you might not have. He will talk very highly of Major John Gower, who got him this job, and who is usually in the club. The investigators can also meet the Major here, if they want to. But Toby is pretty pressed for cash, so his trust can be bought. I definitely recommend having him offer to do some mundane tasks for the investigators, maybe for small amounts of cash. It kind of naturally implies that he's tight for money, and maybe favors or even information can be bought from him. Maybe the information that he has shouldn't come out the very first time they meet. But yeah, just to kind of build up that character of he needs money. The Major, on the other hand, Major John Gower, will give no information about the raid, no matter what. Kind of soldier's honour. He was definitely on the raid. He was the second in command. He is not superstitious at all, and he will just refuse any talk about a curse. So, it should come as no surprise that he is the next to die. After meeting the investigators, on his way home on a very foggy night, Gower is attacked by the jackal-headed Child of the Sphinx. He is basically picked up and impaled onto the spikes of a nearby fence. His screams get the attention of the police and possibly the investigators. If the investigators get there first, they can hear his dying words. Abaddon, but it was real. Alive. Abaddon is the location of the cult raid. There is an unnecessarily complicated part added here. I'll just read exactly what it says to you. The investigators may well believe he is referring to the mummy in Hollingsworth's possession, even though you don't already know about that, or you don't know about that yet. But in reality, he was trying to tell them that the creature that attacked him was identical to a statue he saw in the temple at Abaddon, only it was real, alive. This is an absolutely unnecessary complication, because almost nowhere else will you find any connection to like a statue. The only way that you would be able to make this connection that the major saw a statue that looks like this is if you're in the company of one of the men who was on the raid when you go to where the child of the Sphinx is standing as a statue. If he attacks you, it's probably not going to be enough of a connection. So I just don't worry about this. It's an unnecessary complication that I don't think adds anything to it, really. Anyway, so around this time, the police will get involved because they've seen you at the murder. Or that they're starting to connect the murders as possibly a serial killer thing. You get to meet Inspector Harrison Craddock, and the investigators' involvement in the case will definitely come to light. Craddock, however, is a very honourable man, and he will treat aristocrats and street thugs the exact same if they have broken the law. So don't break the law in front of him. Although the police didn't see much of a connection between the deaths up till now Craddock, at least, believes one of the members of the regiment is responsible. So one of the men from the army. Maybe he thinks they are trying to cover up some kind of wartime indiscretion. And his first suspect is Hollingsworth. But he will also start to be suspicious if he sees kind of mysterious Egyptians wandering around and kind of, always being in the wrong place. If the investigators cooperate with the detective, he will leave them alone. Or the inspector, I'm sorry. He will leave them alone. But if they interfere and they try and, stop him in his investigations, he won't hesitate in locking them up. So now the investigators will probably want to go to Hollingsworth's house, which is called Kandahar House. He will deny everything and not be helpful at all to the investigators. Only if there is an attack on Jeffrey Jordan will his resolve kind of finally be shaken and he might open up a little bit. His dismissive attitude, it says in the book that his dismissive attitude might lead the investigators to think that he is the murderer. So I would definitely go for this. Play him up really suspiciously. He's definitely not telling you everything because there's a mummy. And the police inspector may have already started you thinking that maybe he is the bad guy. And later someone else will throw shade on him as well. The mummy is hidden, locked in the colonel's study, along with the scrolls, and only Hollingsworth himself and his butler Fordyce, who is fiercely loyal to him, have the keys, and they will not give them to the investigators. It doesn't really discuss kind of breaking in here, but it does a little bit. It would be quite difficult to get in and get the items. But while you're in the house, Hollingsworth's wife, Ramona, is such an important personality. Unfortunately, she only gets this very small piece of information here. Later, it references, Ramona told you about this, but in this part, it doesn't say it at all. So unfortunately, her section is a little bit badly written, not as clear as it could have been. And you don't know exactly what she knows. But based on the later hints, I think she can tell the investigators two vital pieces of information. First, her husband was visited by an Egyptian recently, and he has become increasingly bad-natured since then, even avoiding the Army and Naval Club, which used to be his daily routine. That was his way to let off steam. And maybe she can point out that also he had a falling out with a good friend, Jeffrey Jordan. So these are pretty much the only leads you will get to Fayez and Jordan, although Fayez will seek you out. But there is no information in the text about it. Especially the Jordan incident was years ago. Why would the wife bring it up now? So I'd say have her mention that in the past when Hollingsworth was angry, The only two things that cheered him up were going to the club and talking to Jordan, or gambling with Jordan, or going hunting with Jordan, or something with Jordan. But they had a big fight years ago. I'm sure my husband would love to see him now. Maybe even if the investigators aren't kind of picking up on that, even have her ask the investigators to go talk to Jordan and be like, you know, Ramona wants you to go and see him. Is there any chance you could try and patch things up or something like that? But just before we get to Jordan, another person you might want to visit is Dr. Elliot Sangster. So he was one of the regiment, like one of the investigators' uncle. So he, like Alan, was not part of the cult raid. But Sangster never wanted to join the army. He had to for financial reasons. So he will kind of share information pretty freely with the players. He doesn't know that much, but he did hear of some secret mission Hollingsworth ran while in Egypt. And if you think your players aren't picking up on the clues so far, not that there have been that many, you could even get Dr. Sangster to elaborate a little bit more, maybe drop in a few more clues, maybe talk about selling stuff on the black market or some secret scrolls that he saw, something like that. So the main lead that you've got now, if you take my advice about Ramona, is to talk to Jeffrey Jordan. He used to work at the British Museum, so you might want to go to the British Museum, or you can visit him in his home. But even though he is a very key player in this story, the scenario makes it quite difficult to talk to him. He really tries to fob them off. First by sending his landlady out to try and get rid of them, and then he himself tries to get rid of them. They eventually get in, and then he won't say anything. If you want to roleplay this a bit, the investigators should certainly get to talk to him. And if you don't want to give any information yet, you could say something like, 2 deaths is just a coincidence. Come back to me when it's 3, in a kind of a mocking, dismissive tone. And then when they come back, then he will let them in. Maybe he's like, oh, maybe it is serious. But otherwise, if you don't want to roleplay that, just make sure that the investigators do get in to talk to him. The scenario says Jordan is totally uncooperative, even though lives may be at stake. But I think that he has to divulge information to the party. Up until now, they know that 1 member died accidentally, and 2 members, one in Dover, one in London, have been murdered. That's all. Maybe you bought some information from Toby Norton, and maybe you've taken my advice to seek out Faiz as well. But really, you don't have much to go on. There's not even much of a mystery yet. Just, a couple of people have died. Are they connected? Maybe. So Jeffrey Jordan, I think, should at least give them some hint that he and Hollingsworth fell out over some scrolls. And maybe that will lead you to go back and talk to Hollingsworth about the scrolls, and he gets kind of abnormally angry. Something to tell your players that they're onto something now. But yeah, if you get Jeffrey to mention this, it can also work well if the players next go to see Faiz. Because Faiz we'll talk about him in a second, but he will mention the curse, and the investigators might think that Faiz is, nice and friendly. They might mention that Jeffrey Jordan has a copy of the scrolls, or they might mention that he looked at the scrolls, which inadvertently puts Jordan's life in danger. So the next one up is either the players will seek him out or he might seek them out. Is Monir Faiz, the lead cultist of the Egyptians. So if he finds that they're looking into the case or asking questions, he might reach out to them. So he is legitimately in England studying Egyptian relics at the British Museum for a scholar back at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. You can send telegrams. This can all be confirmed. This is absolutely legitimate. He says that he stumbled upon the Abadan cult during his studies, and he's seen some strange things in his travels. So you can really play him up as just a concerned citizen. He tried to warn the colonel about this, but he feels maybe, possibly due to his, and this is me adding this in, possibly due to maybe language difficulties, that the colonel might have misconstrued his warnings as a threat. And it's just, I was trying to, help. And Fayez pretends not to know about the murders, but when he finds out, he kind of increasingly seems more worried about this curse. Definitely play Fayez as charming and genuine, and then when the betrayal comes, it's much stronger. So a part that I would probably discard, which comes up next, is Hollingsworth having a large house in a great part of London, that being suspicious. As it's written, Fayez tries to throw suspicion on the colonel, and there's a full sidebar dedicated to this. The sidebar talks about, in the mummy case, there was a secret compartment at the bottom, which had jewels, and Hollingsworth and Jordan sold them, enabling Hollingsworth to buy the large house, and Jordan had gambling debts, so he agreed reluctantly. That's why he thinks the Egyptians are out for revenge. But why would it be now after so many years? And why would Jordan be so worried about the scrolls if he thinks that the deaths are just, natural, like Egyptians taking revenge? So this is a sidetrack I would just abandon completely, because it doesn't it just adds extra confusion for not really much extra benefit. I don't think it really helps at all. So anyway, you can, after you meet up with Fayez, you can also sneak into his hotel room. And if you do, you will almost certainly set off a magic stone. So investigators won't notice this, that they won't notice that they've set off the magic stone, but they might actually see the stone. But anyway, it will alert Fayez to the fact that someone is in his room, and he can use some extra magic points to see who it is. Apart from that, there is not much else in his room, apart from a few more magic stones, not activated. And he also has handwritten notes with the names and addresses of members of the battalion. Probably he obtained these from Somerset House. These start to make him look a little bit suspicious, but he can kind of explain them away, saying that he just wanted to go and talk to all the members to kind of warn them about, the curse. If the investigators follow Fayez, or otherwise if they see the two other Egyptians who will be out kind of trying to scare members of the battalion, and especially Hollingsworth, if they follow them, they may be led to the house in Islington. So Fayez has rented the house for the Egyptians to stay in, along with the Child of the Sphinx and some zombies. There's not so much here. The top floor is just not used by them at all. The ground floor, there's nothing really, except in a kitchen cabinet you can find two jackal head masks or helmets in one of the cabinets, which the Egyptians go out and they wear to try and scare people in the battalion. But the main thing that you can find is if you go into the basement. There's a few rooms. One of the rooms has some zombies, and another room has the Child of the Sphinx. So the Child of the Sphinx is standing perfectly still like a statue and won't attack unless it is attacked first. It will, however, start following the investigators as they leave, and it will try to ambush them and kill them at the first opportunity. It's also wearing a protective amulet. So this is the point that I was referencing earlier. When Major John Gower dies, there's a reference to him having seen a statue here. And the only other connection would be in the Dover, in The Strangled Man, one of his neighbors saw an extremely tall figure. That's about it. So I would say just get rid of those ideas. It's not really important. But yeah, that's all you'll find in the house in Islington. So another night, possibly when the investigators are visiting the Army Club again, maybe interviewing people again, Toby Norton, the kind of the poor lower level worker there, is killed while taking out the trash from the club. If the investigators are present, they may hear his scream, but they can't save him. But they might be able to chase down his attacker. Not much information is given about the chase here, and it's kind of said just kind of like they might be able to chase him down. I think this would have been a good chance to put in the chase rules, the coach chase rules that were added for Cthulhu by Gaslight 3rd edition, but I'll talk about them a little bit later. So, after all or most of these major incidents, the cultists will try to get the scrolls from Jeffrey Jordan, unless the investigators intervene. And if the investigators don't intervene, the cultists will also kill Jordan. However, for the story to continue, you essentially have to let the cultists get away with one of the scrolls. If the investigators are present, have the child of the Sphinx and some of the zombies do the attacking while the Egyptian cultists wait outside. Then the zombies can just throw down the scrolls if they can't get away from the investigators. If the investigators do a great job, maybe they can get a hold of the English translation, but the villains have to get away with the original copy. I would say probably leave the English one behind, or at least part of it. So if the investigators do a great job, then they get the full English translation of it. And if they don't do so well, they get kind of fragments of it. This is so that you can give the investigators a clue as to what to do next. At this stage, there's still a decent chance that they don't know that there's a mummy involved. The only way they would know is if Hollingsworth has shown it to them, which he won't have, or if Fayez has told them. He might have just mentioned they stole some treasure from Egypt and I wanted to warn them about the curse. He might not have said they stole a mummy and some scrolls. So if you don't give them a little bit of a hint here as to what's going to happen, like keywords like mummy, resurrection, something like that, if they only get the scraps, then they have a bit of an idea what to do next. So after this, if they then approach Hollingsworth and talk about how the investigators think that Fayez and his cult are responsible for the murders, Hollingsworth may come clean about the whole thing now. And hopefully this happens and Hollingsworth trusts the investigators and maybe they prepare to barricade the house or something. That's really what the scenario wants to build up to. So the climax of the adventure is called The Night of the Jackals, although there's really not so much jackal activity. It takes place about a night or two after the scrolls are stolen. So the goal is for Fayez to resurrect the mummy. He can do this from afar, and the investigators are very unlikely to find him as he is safely a mile away from the house, in kind of like a quiet woodland or something like that. At the same time, the cultists try to distract the investigators in two ways. First, they try to kill, or at least threaten, Alan Pace, who is one of the investigators' uncle. And Alan should probably see some jackal-headed being following him around, and he should feel threatened, and he wants to send for help from the investigators. And at the same time, or a little bit after that, There will also be an attack directly at Kandahar House, which is Hollingsworth's house, by zombies and the other cultists and maybe the Child of the Sphinx as well. All they want to do is drag the investigators and all the people in the house, or at least all the fighters, away from the mummy. And then from far away, Fayez will be conducting his ritual to resurrect the mummy. And if the mummy is resurrected, it will quickly try to do a mind transfer with the first person it comes in contact with. For example, it could be the wife, it could be the son, it could be the butler, it could be one of the other house staff which are listed here as well. If the mummy can do that, it will feign kind of like passing out while the mind of, for example, the wife is inside the mummy's body, unable to speak. Most likely it will be killed. The mummy in the new body doesn't understand English or modern social norms, but is quite smart. So it will act like it's insane and could even be institutionalized, which, might be natural seeing, a mummy walking around in front of you. And while it's institutionalized, it learns enough English and enough norms to kind of pass as, normal. And upon release, it will try to make its way back to Egypt, possibly switching minds several times. If the investigators kill the mind of the mummy in the body of someone else, they will probably be tried for murder, and any excuse is unlikely to satisfy the courts. Any kind of talk about a reanimated mummy mind switching to this person is not very persuasive. It might help you escape execution if you get sent to the insane asylum. But the main idea here is that the mummy will probably escape and have it out for the players in a future campaign to be created by the keeper. It's very unlikely that the players can really successfully do anything about this. It doesn't really talk so much about what if the players just kill the mummy now, like maybe cut it to pieces. I would say don't let that stop the mummy from being resurrected unless they really take great measures to destroy it, like, burning it or something like that, or possibly separating its body out across the world. But again, that can lead to a future adventure. So that's basically the end of the adventure. So here are my thoughts. So, Night of the Jackal is an interesting story, definitely. However, I do have a few problems with it. First, let's look at it as a Gaslight scenario. It has gentlemen's clubs, the Army and Navy Club. It has Egyptology, kind of. It's very light. And in the third edition, and I think in the second edition as well, they talk about how Egyptology is really becoming popular at the time. But it's only really light flavouring. And the last thing, it also has the London fog. A little. I've definitely added in more of this when playing this game. Apart from that, it could really be set at any time. All of the events happen years later after the actual raid. So it could be played at any time. It's not really specific to the Gaslight era. And for Cthulhu by Gaslight, there is very, very little Cthulhu mythos in it. Although it does kind of connect the Egyptian gods to Lovecraftian gods, it's almost a throwaway point. As a scenario, ignoring the era it's set in, there are many points where the players hit a dead end and have to go back to the same people who have already refused to help them. So they have to talk to Hollingsworth and he'll be like, no, I don't want to talk to you. They'll talk to Toby, he'll be like, no. But then if you find out, maybe you can pay him, go back to Hollingsworth, he's still no. The Major, he won't talk to you anything. Talk to your uncle, he'll tell you stuff, but he doesn't know anything. And honestly, for the longest time, the players might not find out that there's even a mummy involved. Uh, that really doesn't come out in the way it's written until quite late on. And I think that the players can really be lost. So basically the players hear that the regiment is being killed off like a curse. But as I said, the members who are open don't know about the open to talking to the investigators. They don't know about the raid. And the members who know about the raid won't talk about it. So another thing is the scenario also says that there are several other members of the battalion living outside of London, but they are not named or mentioned apart from that. There's no location for them. I would say get rid of that. Just keep it simple and have the core named members here being the only ones who went on that small raid. Just say it was a small cult or they gave no resistance or something like that. And further, I would probably have one more death that's actually suspicious to start off the adventure. An accidental death plus a strangulation in different cities doesn't really suggest that much to me. If you're going to have that as the hook for your players, I don't think they're going to, well, maybe they will, for the sake of the game, kind of pick up on that hook, but it's not really something that captivating. It's an accidental death, it seems, and a strangulation way off in the other end of the country. But if you add in another death, then you're looking at people starting to kill off the army members. So I think having a death, an accidental death, and another death, excuse me, that's a proper hook, I think. And after that, maybe have Toby, before they can buy information from Toby, maybe have him let slip something about a secret mission, but then he shuts up about it. And then later during the campaign, as people start to die, especially John Gower, who he's very taken with, then maybe he'll start to talk about it a bit more. Maybe he can't tell you everything, but he can tell you some things. I also don't love the finale. Basically, right before the finale, there's no way that you can prevent the cultists getting the scrolls that they need. There's no way, or else, like the adventure as written, falls to pieces, basically. And then when it comes to the finale, there is basically no way that you can find Faiz to stop the ritual. And if the whole party decides to go off together to try and save the uncle, they will actually miss the whole finale. So you'll just come back, the mummy will be gone, the scrolls will be gone, people will be dead, and you'll have no information about anything, unless you want to maybe try and track down Faiz or something like that, but you're not going to really have luck, and there's nothing written for that. But if you are in the house, or most of the party stays in the house, the mummy is still probably going to get away fine anyway. If he mind switches with someone, then either he gets away or the players are going to be killed or arrested. And really, there's just no player agency in this. Like, it seems like it's already a decided outcome. Now, don't get me wrong, in Cthulhu mythos, if you realize that you have no agency against a mythos creature, that's fine. But really, this is like having no agency just against other men, other cultists. And it's a little bit like the players' activities don't affect the outcome so much. And as I mentioned before, I think including some kind of coach chase would have been great, would have really started to help create the feeling of Cthulhu by Gaslight. They have new rules for this in this edition, but they don't make use of them. So this is definitely a huge upgrade from the Yorkshire Horrors. That was the scenario included in the first and second edition of Cthulhu by Gaslight. And the Yorkshire Horrors had some good ideas, definitely, but as printed, it was virtually unplayable, I think. It's a big, big mess. This adventure, however, does represent a nice introduction to Cthulhu by Gaslight, and it has an interesting, if a little bit unclear, storyline, and, obvious enemies as well. The confusion at the start can actually be great, thinking that maybe the colonel is killing people to cover up some kind of military atrocity that he committed or something like that. And if you, as the keeper, can play up Faiz as just a good man who wants to avoid curses and, ruining Egypt's reputation and innocent people dying, that is a great way to go at the start. If you are interested in playing this is one of the 2 adventures included in Cthulhu by Gaslight 3rd edition. My main tips for playing are: make the strangulation that you hear about the 3rd death. The other 2 can be accidental if you want, but just so that it's not just the 2nd one. Have people drop some small hints early about a secret mission. Of course, this can only be those who know about it. Make sure, this is the biggest tip of all, make sure that Ramona, Hollingsworth's wife, talks to the investigators and mentions both Faiz, even if not by name, just some Egyptian guy came from the British Museum to talk to him, and also make sure that she mentions Jeffrey Jordan, maybe even going as far as to invite or to ask the players to go seek his help. I would definitely skip the whole sidetrack about Jordan and Hollingsworth selling the hidden jewels. I think that adds nothing and it just makes it more complicated. And I don't think the players are likely to find out about it as well. Also, have a reason in your mind. So all of the people who went on the raid, Hollingsworth sold a lot of the jewelry and artifacts on the black market and gave money to all of the people. He didn't take any, but he gave money to all of the people. But Toby has now come back and is so broke. So have some kind of role-playing or some kind of reason why he has lost all of his money. Maybe he has a gambling problem or something like that. And you can kind of play into that as well. That could even be a way that you manage to get some more information out of him. Like you could have a gambling game between one of the players, or maybe many of the players, and Toby. And if he loses, then he has to give you some information. But if he wins, then he gets a lot of your money as well. And maybe he'll, be nice and still give you some information. And before then, or possibly after then as well, if Toby loses, have Toby constantly offering to do favors for the investigators for small amounts of money. Probably he won't do this in front of other officers, but this really kind of builds up the idea that he can be bought, really emphasizing he needs money, he has information, let's exploit that. Okay, so that is going to do it for today. The next video I will have will be The Burnt Man, which is the second scenario in this book. Okay, so if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave it down in the comments below. Comments in the comments. Okay, so that's it for today. Have a great weekend, everyone, and I will see you next time.